There's something about politics in Malawi that could make even seasoned dramatists jealous. You think you've seen it all until you see the one man who should have been at the front row of the nation's biggest event. Suddenly, not there. On the day Kamuzu Stadium roared with song, flags, and the smell of newly printed DPP regalia, every camera lens was waiting for one image. That moment when President Peter Mutharika, at 85, would stand before the people once more, hand on the Bible, and take his oath. But in the midst of that blue ocean of celebration, one seat stood out, painfully empty. Lazarus Chakwera, the outgoing president, was nowhere to be seen. Not in the stands, not in the VIP box, not even in the official list of attendees. And in a country that takes political symbolism almost as seriously as football results, that absence was louder than any vuvuzela in the crowd. Now, Malawians are no strangers to political tension. We've seen alliances born on podiums and die by press release. We've seen handshakes that meant peace on TV and betrayal by evening. But Chakwera's decision, or perhaps his exclusion from attending Mutharika's inauguration, that's on another level. It's the kind of thing that makes every journalist put down their tea and start a new headline. So today, we at GlobalPulseNewz are cutting through the noise to unpack why this happened. The real, unspoken, quietly explosive reasons Lazarus Chakwera didn't attend Peter Mutharika's inauguration. Because, let's be honest, in politics, what is not said is often 10 times more powerful than what is shouted into a microphone. We're breaking it down into 6 facts, each one peeling back a new layer of this story, from insider whispers to national perception. Each fact may sting, shock, or even amuse you, but together they'll show you how silent.
There's something about politics in Malawi that could make even seasoned dramatists jealous. You'd think you've seen it all, until you see the one man who should have been at the front row of the nation's biggest event, suddenly not there. On the day Kamuzu Stadium roared with song, flags, and the smell of newly printed DPP regalia, every camera lens was waiting for one image. That moment when President Peter Mutharika, at 85, would stand before the people once more, hand on the Bible, and take his oath. But in the midst of that blue ocean of celebration, one seat stood out, painfully empty. Lazarus Chakwera, the outgoing president, was nowhere to be seen. Not in the stands, not in the VIP box, not even in the official list of attendees. And in a country that takes political symbolism almost as seriously as football results, that absence was louder than any vuvuzela in the crowd. Now, Malawians are no strangers to political tension. We've seen alliances born on podiums and die by press release. We've seen handshakes that meant peace on TV and betrayal by evening. But Chakwera's decision, or perhaps his exclusion from attending Mutharika's inauguration, that's on another level. It's the kind of thing that makes every journalist put down their tea and start a new headline. So today, we at GlobalPulseNewz are cutting through the noise to unpack why this happened, the real, unspoken, quietly explosive reasons Lazarus Chakwera didn't attend Peter Mutharika's inauguration. Because let's be honest, in politics, what is not said is often 10 times more powerful than what is shouted into a microphone. We're breaking it down into 6 facts, each one peeling back a new layer of this story, from insider whispers to national perception. Each fact may sting, shock, or even amuse you, but together they'll show you how silence became the loudest statement in Malawi's 2025 political season. So, grab your tea, my friend, because after this story, you might just spill it. Let's start where it hurts the most. The possibility that Chakwera wasn't absent by choice, but by design. Yes, you heard that right. Some credible reports, including insights from around the event's planning committee, suggest that the inauguration guest list was selectively filtered, meaning some names were quietly trimmed, and Chakwera's may have been one of them. It's like planning a family wedding and forgetting to invite your brother, but then still sending him the photos. According to insiders, the organizing committee, heavily dominated by DPP loyalists, viewed Chakwera's presence as unnecessary and politically risky. The logic was simple. Why give the outgoing president a photo opportunity when the entire event was meant to mark DPP's triumphant return? And if you know how our political choreography works, you'll understand the thinking. Optics are everything. That one handshake between Mutharika and Chakwera, one photo of the two men smiling, could have rewritten the public narrative. It would scream unity, yes, but it might also have softened DPP's back-in-charge image. And in Malawi, power is like a fresh maize cob. Everyone wants to be seen holding it first. So allegedly, the decision was made, quietly, firmly, and perhaps a little spitefully, that the former president and his secretary to the president and cabinet, Colleen Zamba, would not receive formal invitations. Even the event's printed program reportedly made no mention of them. It was almost surgical, a clean removal. Not messy, not loud, just a silent erasure. Now, of course, official DPP sources dismissed any talk of deliberate exclusion. They said all national leaders were welcome to attend. But welcome doesn't mean invited. And in Malawi, we all know the difference between the two. You see, in the world of politics, silence can be the most powerful RSVP. By keeping quiet about whether Chakwera was invited or not, the organizers gave themselves plausible deniability and maximum gossip mileage. The result? Every newsroom, every WhatsApp group, and every minibus conversation was suddenly about that empty seat. One could argue, and many are, that this was all part of a bigger communication strategy. You remove your rival not just from the event, but from the image. Because an inauguration, especially one as politically loaded as Mutharika's, is not just a ceremony, it's a visual statement of power restored. And there was no room in that frame for a man whose party had just been sent back to the opposition benches. Still, the question remains, if Chakwera wasn't wanted, who exactly made that call? Was it Mutharika himself? His advisors? The DPP machinery? Nobody knows for sure, but one thing's certain, the decision didn't happen by accident, because nothing in Malawian politics ever does. But if Chakwera was truly kept out on purpose, we have to ask, why? What's the logic behind sidelining a former president at a national event that's supposed to represent unity? The answer, as we'll uncover next, might just be one of the oldest tricks in the playbook, a move where silence becomes strategy.
Now, let's be real. Malawian politics has its own dictionary. When politicians say we respect each other, it often means we tolerate each other until cameras leave. And nowhere was that double-edged politeness more visible than in how Chakwera's absence played out. Some people looked at that empty seat and said, maybe he was busy. Others, they saw something much deeper, a snub so strategic it could write its own textbook. Let's start with the basics. In power transitions, optics are everything. Inaugurations are not just about speeches or oaths, they are about control of the narrative. Whoever stands on that stage first defines how history remembers the moment. And Mutharika's camp knows this game well. They've played it before. Back in 2014, the DPP used stagecraft and symbolism to solidify legitimacy after Joyce Banda's turbulent exit. Fast forward to 2025, same formula, new target. By ensuring Chakwera was absent, the DPP erased any visual reminder that this was a handover of power. Instead, it looked like a resurrection, as if Mutharika had returned not from defeat, but from destiny. The snub, therefore, wasn't an emotional move, it was an editorial choice. Because imagine for a second, if Chakwera had attended, sat front row, shook Mutharika's hand, and smiled for the cameras, what headline would the world see? Malawi unites for a peaceful transition. Nice, polite, boring. But if Chakwera stays away, the headline becomes juicier, edgier, and more politically charged. Chakwera boycotts inauguration as the DPP returns to power. Which one sells more papers? Which one fuels more discussion? You already know the answer. In fact, in media logic, controversy isn't bad, it's branding. DPP's image thrives on being the comeback kid, the party that survives the storm. So this no-show played right into that identity. The missing seat became a silent co-star in their victory show. But here's the irony. Chakwera's absence also gave him power. The man didn't say a word, yet he hijacked half the conversation. In every radio show and online forum, the question wasn't, what did Mutharika say? It was, where was Chakwera? That's political judo. You use your opponent's momentum to make your own point. So while DPP celebrated, MCP quietly smiled too. Because absence in politics is like silence in music, it only makes the sound around it more dramatic. Of course, we can't forget the cultural angle. In Malawi, respect is public currency. When someone older or senior doesn't show up to an event, it's not always rebellion. Sometimes it's restraint. It's a polite way of saying, you go on, I won't disturb the flow. But combine that with years of rivalry, contested elections and political bitterness, and suddenly that restraint looks a lot like resistance. The snub became a chess move, non-violent, non-verbal, but very visible. So in the end, this wasn't just a missed photo op. It was a meticulously timed performance. DPP showed dominance, Chakwera preserved dignity, and Malawi got a new episode in its long-running series called Politics with Plot Twists. But here's where it gets even spicier, because while Mutharika's camp was busy owning the stage, Chakwera wasn't exactly sulking at home. Oh no. The man made his move, quietly, diplomatically, and perfectly worded. Which brings us to fact 3, the art of playing nice when you're actually throwing shade. Now, if there's one thing Malawian politicians do better than most, it's sounding friendly while setting fires with their words. Chakwera's response to the inauguration proved that perfectly. Even though he was physically absent, his Malawi Congress Party didn't just disappear into silence. Within hours of Mutharika's oath, MCP issued a statement congratulating the new president and wishing him good health and success in rebuilding the country. At face value, that's as diplomatic as it gets. Civil, respectful, textbook decorum. But read between the lines and you'll see it. That statement had seasoning. It wasn't hot pepper, but it had flavor. Because here's what it didn't say. It didn't mention unity. It didn't promise collaboration. It didn't say, we look forward to working with the new administration. It was polite but distant, the political equivalent of saying, we wish you well from over there. In short, Chakwera executed the classic Malawian ndithu diplomacy. Say something nice, but your tone does all the heavy lifting. The message was clear. You've taken over. Fine. Let's see if you can handle it. Analysts were quick to point out the contrast. While DPP's celebration was loud, confident, and almost cinematic, MCP's message was minimalistic, a quiet reminder that maturity doesn't need microphones. It was as if Chakwera was saying, go ahead and dance, we'll watch, but remember, we still own half the voters. This kind of political communication isn't new in Malawi, it's part of our unwritten tradition. Even when rivals exchange greetings, there's always an undercurrent of competition. A smile can mean 10 things, and a simple congratulations can be both genuine and sarcastic at the same time. By staying away and releasing that message, Chakwera achieved 2 goals. First, he avoided any public humiliation or tension during the ceremony. Second, he positioned himself as the statesman who chooses dignity over drama. For someone whose presidency ended with economic and political turbulence, that restraint earned him quiet points with moderates and international observers. And let's not forget, diplomacy is also theater. Just because you're not on the stage doesn't mean you're not part of the show. Chakwera's written words traveled through newspapers, radios, and social media feeds faster than Mutharika's spoken ones reached Kamuzu Stadium's back rows. His absence became presence. His silence became speech. His restraint became resistance. And in true Malawian fashion, people summed it up in one phrase: Ndi Chakwera alimbe mkamwa, mulimau. So when the DPP crowd cheered, "We are back," somewhere in the background, MCP supporters probably smiled and whispered, "Yes, but we never left." And that's the beauty of Malawian politics. Everyone claps with one hand while holding a card with the other. But the deeper story isn't just about what was said or not said. It's about what that absence revealed, the fractures, the ghosts, and the unfinished chapters of power that never really end. And that's exactly where we're heading next.
In politics, what's missing often matters more than what's present. At Mutharika's inauguration, that was truer than ever. Because while DPP flags waved proudly and Kamuzu Stadium shook under chants of Abusa Bweranso, one chair in the VIP section sat quietly empty, a symbol heavy enough to bend headlines. Let's be clear, Chakwera's absence wasn't just about a man skipping an event. It was about a nation witnessing the shape of its political divide. That empty seat became a mirror reflecting deeper fractures, ideological, generational, and emotional. If you rewind just a few years, Malawi had entered what many call the alliance era. Remember the Tonse Alliance, that grand experiment that once promised unity, reform, and economic revival. It brought together politicians who once couldn't even share a cup of tea. It was ambitious, hopeful, and, at first, convincing. But, as we now know, it ended the way most political marriages do, with polite silence and hidden bruises. So, when Peter Mutharika took his oath without Chakwera in sight, it wasn't just an individual absence. It was a symbolic divorce, the final nail in the coffin of Malawi's illusion of seamless transitions and lasting alliances. The picture told the story. Reconciliation is not yet national policy. Even some within DPP quietly admitted that while the optics were powerful, they were also risky. The absence of Chakwera and his cabinet not only emphasized division, but also hinted at fragility. You can celebrate victory, yes, but without your predecessor present, it's like performing a duet solo. You sound louder, but you miss harmony. Meanwhile, on the streets, Malawians noticed. In conversations from Blantyre to Lilongwe, the narrative was split. Some said, "Good, why should he come?" Others said, "Hey, unity begins with presence." In a country where symbolism is sacred, both sides had a point. But perhaps the most telling thing about that empty seat was how it reminded everyone of Malawi's biggest political flaw: our inability to close chapters. We don't move on, we just pause until the next fight. From the 2019 elections nullified by the courts, to the reruns that brought Chakwera into power, and now back to Mutharika's comeback, Malawi has been locked in a political tug-of-war where the rope keeps changing hands, but nobody ever lets go. Chakwera's absence, therefore, wasn't just about today. It was about yesterday refusing to die. It was about pride on both sides, because in truth, both men needed each other that day. Mutharika needed the gesture of legitimacy, and Chakwera needed the grace of closure, but neither got it. So while Kamuzu Stadium erupted in celebration, the silence of that missing handshake whispered something more profound. Malawi is still healing, and our politics has yet to learn forgiveness. And forgiveness, my friend, is a rare thing in politics, especially when history still stings. Because behind that polite silence are years of unfinished business, bruised egos, and old debts waiting to be collected. Which brings us perfectly to Fact 5, the scorecard of grudges that never really expire. You see, when two political heavyweights like Mutharika and Chakwera share a stage, or in this case don't share one, it's never about just one event. It's about everything that came before it. The truth is, these two men have been playing political chess for years, and this inauguration was simply another move on a very long board. You can't talk about Chakwera's absence without remembering how their rivalry shaped modern Malawian politics. Let's rewind to 2019, when the Constitutional Court made history by nullifying the presidential election results, a move that shocked the continent and crowned Malawi as the model of African democracy. Chakwera, then the opposition leader, became the hero of electoral justice, while Mutharika was cast as the villain who'd lost legitimacy. Fast forward 5 years, and the roles are reversed.
Now it's Mutharika basking in the comeback spotlight, while Chakwera quietly steps aside, watching history loop itself like a rerun. Only this time, it's not law that dethroned one, it's the ballot. That's why many analysts believe Chakwera's absence was also a moral protest. Because how do you stand on the same platform where a man you once defeated now reclaims your seat, quoting scripture and vowing reform, the same reform you promised just 5 years ago? It's like attending your own political funeral. But there's more. The rivalry between DPP and MCP is not just personal, it's historical. It's an echo of the very foundations of Malawi's political identity, the fight between progress and nostalgia, reform and return, youth and experience. Mutharika's DPP has always styled itself as the custodian of order and tradition, while Chakwera's MCP wears the badge of renewal and change. Yet, ironically, both have borrowed tactics and ideas from each other over time. So beneath the surface, this wasn't just about attendance, it was about pride. National pride, party pride, and personal pride. Because every Malawian knows our leaders are not fond of public vulnerability. To show up would have been an act of humility. To stay home was an act of resistance. Now let's not ignore the psychology at play. For Mutharika, this inauguration was redemption. For Chakwera, it was déjà vu. And between redemption and déjà vu lies discomfort, especially when the past is still breathing down your neck. The same way Malawian said, Tawana Monsonkolia DPP, como MCP Sajipita Manso. This moment made that phrase feel prophetic. The opposition's quiet boycott was less about protocol and more about pride management. And maybe that's why, for all its celebration, Mutharika's ceremony carried an undertone of nostalgia, as if the country was celebrating not just a return to leadership, but a return to familiarity. Because deep down, Malawian politics isn't just about progress. It's about who gets to write the next chapter in the same old story. And in that story, both Mutharika and Chakwera are recurring characters, rivals today, potential allies tomorrow, and historical footnotes forever linked by rivalry and regret. But here's the real twist. This rivalry isn't just frozen in the past, it's evolving. The next chapter isn't about the men themselves, it's about what their silence sets in motion. The economic, diplomatic, and moral direction Malawi takes from here. And that's where we head next.
Now, let's talk about the speech that turned Kamuzu Stadium into a theater of power. President Peter Mutharika's inauguration address. Because let's be honest, it wasn't just a speech, it was a statement. A carefully aimed verbal grenade wrapped in scripture, delivered with a calm tone but explosive meaning. Mutharika stood at the podium, composed, seasoned, and unmistakably assertive. His words were slow but heavy, as though each sentence had been weighed like gold. And within the first 5 minutes, it became clear this was not going to be a victory dance. It was a declaration of war on complacency, and maybe, just maybe, on his predecessors too. He opened with gratitude to God, the people, and the judiciary, but then, boom, he dropped the hammer. There is no food, there is no forex, there is no money, and borrowing is extremely high, and nobody knows where the borrowed money went. Now, let's be honest, that wasn't an economic update, that was an accusation, a live audit in front of 60,000 people. And the subtext? Everyone knew exactly who those words were directed at. If Chakwera had been there, this line alone would have forced the kind of awkward smile politicians hate, the one that says, he's talking about me, but I can't walk out. So in a way, his absence saved him from a front-row roast. But to the people, the message hit like lightning. It confirmed what they already felt, that the economy is bleeding, the system is choking, and someone had to say it out loud. And to his supporters, that bluntness was refreshing. This was Mutharika's signature style returning in full form, the calm academic with the heart of a disciplinarian. He didn't just identify the disease, he promised the cure through tough and painful decisions. That phrase, repeated twice, summed up the speech's theme. It wasn't about promises of paradise, it was about demanding patience for purging. And this is where the plot thickens, because his tone wasn't just managerial, it was moral. The spirit that destroys our nation does not come from outside. It comes from us, he said. That's theology meeting politics, and it resonated deeply. It sounded less like a policy statement and more like a sermon from the national pulpit. By the time he ended with, "We shall clean up the house and restore discipline in government," the message was loud and clear. This administration won't be built on pleasantries. It will be built on punishment. But let's not miss the irony. Every president in Malawi's modern history has promised to fight corruption, and yet every government ends up haunted by the same ghosts. Mutharika's challenge, therefore, isn't just rebuilding credibility. It's convincing Malawians that his second act will be different. And that's where Chakwera's absence becomes more than symbolic. It becomes strategic. Because the moment Mutharika drew his battle lines, the opposition quietly knew where to aim next. The inauguration wasn't the end of a campaign. It was the beginning of a new battlefield. So in a strange twist of fate, two men, one speaking loudly in the stadium, one silent in absence, both managed to dominate the national conversation. One with his words, the other with his silence. Together, they scripted a new political chapter that Malawi will be reading for years. And that brings us to the final point, the big picture. What does this silence, this speech, and this spectacle mean for Malawi's future? Because as one era ends and another begins, the echoes of this inauguration may shape not just politics, but the very soul of the nation. Here's the truth, Malawi. Sometimes the biggest statements in politics are made without a microphone. Chakwera's absence from Mutharika's inauguration wasn't just a scheduling gap. It was a signal, a whisper from the past to the future, saying, this story isn't over. And in many ways, that's what makes Malawi's democracy both frustrating and fascinating. It's a constant tug between rivalry and responsibility, between bitterness and belonging. We like to say Malawi is peaceful, and it's true. But peace here doesn't always mean harmony. Sometimes it just means endurance. We argue, we boycott, we criticize, but somehow the center holds. That's the strange beauty of our national rhythm. What this inauguration proved is that politics here is not just about leadership, it's about legacy. Both men, Chakwera and Mutharika, are not just players in a moment, they are chapters in a loop of accountability that refuses to close. One left with dignity, the other returned with determination. And somewhere between those two lies the real Malawi, weary but hopeful, struggling but unbroken. The country stands at a crossroads: economic uncertainty, political fatigue, and a society eager for results, not rhetoric. Mutharika has promised tough decisions, but Malawians have heard that line before. This time, the difference will depend on delivery, not declaration. And as for Chakwera, his silence will either fade into irrelevance or grow into a quiet form of resistance. Because make no mistake, in politics, absence today can become influence tomorrow. So whether you're Team DPP, Team MCP, or Team Just Want Fuel in the Pump, this moment matters. The way our leaders handle power and pride will decide whether this silence becomes a step forward or a slide back. And that's why here at GlobalPulseNewz, we don't just report the headlines, we decode the heartbeat behind them. Because in Malawi, every handshake, every boycott, every missing chair has meaning. If you've made it this far, you already know. This isn't just politics. It's theater, strategy, and human drama all rolled into one. And the story is still unfolding. So do your part, hit like, tap subscribe, and ring that bell, not just for us, but for yourself. Because staying informed isn't just entertainment anymore, it's survival. And as we say right here at GlobalPulseNewz, stay sharp, stay steady, and never stop asking who's missing from the picture. Until next time, this is your Newz, bold, witty, and proudly Malawian.